Hey everyone. We've had a few questions on the Percussion Solutions for Band Directors Facebook group about beginning drum set. So I'm going to try and answer some super basic questions here for you. I'm going to qualify it by saying I am not a drum set player by any stretch of the imagination. I passed my barriers as were required for my degree program. I've played a little bit, but I certainly don't tout myself as being a wonderful drum set player. But if you are a middle school or high school band director and you have a percussionist who's interested in playing in jazz band or being in your stage band, and maybe they have a drum set at home and they play rock and roll or punk music or pop music or whatever, and they don't really have a lot of experience playing jazz, then I can give you a few tips just to get kids started. So I'm going to just try and scale back the most basic ideas about playing jazz music for middle school and maybe a high school jazz band. So the first thing is that most students do not know any of the vocabulary of the jazz language. And that's because they simply didn't grow up listening to it. I didn't grow up listening to it. We'd have to go back generations where jazz music was being played on the radio. Even my father, who's now a grandfather, he was a professional drum set player, but he grew up listening to rock and roll. 1950s. He was in high school in the 1960s, so very much grew up on rock and roll music being played on the radio, and of course that's what most of us listen to, popular music, whatever that may be. So the first thing and the first piece of advice for a very, very beginning player is to listen. There's nothing that can make up for getting the sounds in your ears and then reproducing those sounds. Like any sport, an example, Kobe Bryant mimicking Michael Jordan. Great soccer players, looking up to Mia Hamm and to Lionel Messi and to professionals, and so having an ideal in your ears and in your head will speed them along this process. So you can find discographies anywhere. They're all over the place. Just do a Google search on the internet, and I'll probably list some on this video somewhere at some point. But get kids listening to really, really great jazz drum set players, and that will help them with their feel. Second thing, rock and roll music is amplified, but that's sort of the bottom line. There's amplifiers. You have guitar, bass, lead vocalist. Everybody's plugged in. Everybody's playing, at high volume, and drummers play at high volumes as well. So the techniques that we use in rock and roll and the approach to the drums is very, very loud. And it's supposed to be that way. It doesn't sound good if it's not played with a heavy kick and a big snare drum, and if you're laying into the drums. You can always tell when somebody's unsure. It just doesn't have that wonderful feel that rock and roll has, with that bass on 1 and 3 and that backbeat on 2 and 4. Jazz music, on the other hand, at least in its inception, was acoustic. So you had an acoustic bass, an upright bass. You have saxophone, trombone, and trumpet. So those things were not amplified. And so the approach to particularly the bass drum and the snare drum and the balance of all that is certainly affected. So that's an important distinction, and something to explicitly teach your students, that when we're playing a funk or a rock chart, that we're going to use an electric bass, and the keyboard player will probably play electronic sound, electronic keyboard. Things will be amplified. We're going to use microphones, and we're going to play at those higher volumes. and jazz music is acoustic. So something to keep in mind. The biggest thing that students who play rock and roll and jazz are making that transition, from rock and roll to jazz, is getting over the bass drum, snare drum dominant approach to a ride cymbal and hi-hat dominant approach. Okay? So usually when we play rock and roll, we are going to lift our heel off the ground when we're playing the bass drum pedal, and we are going to leave the beater buried into the head. So we're going to thump that bass drum really heavy, use the entire weight of our leg to get the weight of that mallet and put it into the drum head and leave it there. Boom! And then we're really going to lay into the backbeat on the snare drum, and we're going to hit it hard, usually a rim shot, and we're going to lay into that. So, pop, poof, pop, that's the backbone of popular music. Doesn't matter if it's top 40 or if it's metal. 2 and 4 on the snare with that heavy 1 and 3 on the kick. Jazz is heavy on 2 and 4, but it's heavy on 2 and 4 on the ride cymbal and on the hi-hat. And the bass drum and the snare drum are just tiny little bits of sprinkle on the top of the meal. The steak and potatoes is the ride cymbal and the hi-hat. And then occasionally we throw in some sour cream and chives and a little salt and pepper with the snare drum and the bass drum, but that's the big difference. So the approach to the ride cymbal is probably the thing that is the most misplayed by young players. So we're going to go over that just a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show my approach for teaching young kids. Again, I'm not some amazing drum set player, but this is the basic approach. What we're going to do is we're going to take a pattern that many rudimental drummers already know, and that's just the idea of different heights. So on beat 1, we're going to hit the ride cymbal, and then we're going to lift up with a really, really loose and relaxed grip, and we're going to play count 2 with an accent. And then we're going to let the stick decay for the hitch into a 3. So we're going to go ding, ching, a ling. Ding is low. Ching is heavy on beat 2. A ling is going to slowly die and decay naturally. So it has a nice natural decay to it. Ding, ching, a ling. Ching, a ling. So there's an accent on 2, and then it falls to a 3, a 1. So the basic approach, 1, 2, a 3. So you kind of see that there's that natural decaying effect. There are some nice rudiment relationships to the ride pattern. So I'll go over those real quickly right now. So we're going to take a very, very basic rudiment that many kids, particularly those that grow up in the world of drumline and rudimental percussion, those kids already know. And that is a paradiddle-diddle. So a paradiddle-diddle is right, left, right, right, left, left, right, left, right, right, left, left, and it repeats over and over again. It's a 6-note pattern, and many times it's written as 2 triplets. Okay, so it fits this jazz idea pretty nicely. So if I take that paradiddle-diddle idea and I put it on a drum pad, it simply sounds like this. Again, you'll notice that it's all right-handed and right-hand dominant. Paradiddle-diddle, 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 stop. Okay, so something that a lot of kids know, and it has a nice feel to it. It's easy to play fast. That's actually why it's really, really popular in rudimental drumming. Rudimental kids can burn them pretty quickly. All right, so it's something that it's easy to play quickly. So you'll notice I'm going to take my right hand and I'm going to play the exact same thing that I just played, except I'm going to put my right hand on the ride cymbal, and it develops a perfect ride cymbal pattern. So I'll play it 4 times on the drum pad, and then I'll move my right hand to the cymbal, and you'll hear it. So I'll say it as I go. So paradiddle diddle, paradiddle diddle, paradiddle diddle, paradiddle diddle. Okay, so that ride cymbal pattern where the accent is on 2 and 4, that's a paradiddle diddle. Now, of course, by saying 1, 2, ready, go, and playing paradiddle diddle, I was playing the accent on beat 1 and beat 3. So in order to turn it onto beats 2 and 4, we're just going to precede it by what drummers call a pugada. A pugada is just drummer speak for a right, left, left. So I play a pugada on beat 1, that puts the accent of the paradiddle diddle on beat 2, and then each paradiddle diddle after that is either on beat 2 or on beat 4. So I'll do it on the drum pad first, and then I'll stop, and then I'll do it transferring my hand to the ride cymbal. I'll also write this out on the screen so that you can follow along. So pugada, paradiddle diddle, paradiddle diddle, paradiddle diddle, paradiddle. Now I cut that last paradiddle diddle in half because that's where beat 1 is. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. So all I did is I took the rudimental idea that normally would be written so the accents are on 1 and on 3, and I interrupted it with a pugada so that it would displace the rudiment and put it on beats 2 and beats 4. All right. So here it is, transferring the right hand to the ride cymbal, starting with a pugada. Pugada, paradiddle, paradiddle. Next, we'll talk a little bit about the hi-hat. My approach to the hi-hat is a tension and release, with the tension being on 2 and 4 when we're going down with the hi-hat, and then the heel releasing on 1 and 3. So that we have 1, 2 with the tension on 2 and emphasis on 2 and 4, and then releasing on 1. 2, 3, 4, 1. So I'll set up a camera and we'll show a camera angle of my left foot doing that 2 and 4 idea. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Tension in the calf muscle, releasing on 1. So you release the tension, 1, 2. Right, so there's tension in the calf, tension in the ankle, using the toe and the ball of the foot for beat 2, and then release all of that tension on beat 3, and then tension on 4, and then release on 1, 2, and release, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. With the ride cymbal, 1, 2, 1, 2, ready, go, 1, 2, 1. When we play rock and roll, we usually play with our heel up, and we use the entire weight of our leg, and we push down, and we bury the beater into the head. So there's a lot of weight and a lot of momentum. So all the weight of the leg the calf muscle, all bearing down on the bass drum, and then we bury the beater into the head, and it's really, really loud. That's how you'll find most middle school kids play the bass drum. Whereas in jazz music, usually we want to put our heel down, which also limits the distance the beater travels away from the bass drum head. And then we just gently feather the bass drum with the toe. So the heel stays on the ground, toe stays in contact, and that we just feather the bass drum heel down. So rock and roll and funk music is heel up. Jazz music, slide the foot up a little bit, limit the distance, and you just feather the bass drum with the heel down. Okay, now that we have a basic idea of the ride cymbal and the hi-hat techniques and how they differ from rock and roll techniques, the last thing is the idea of basic comping patterns on the bass drum and on the snare drum. This drum set has been in quarantine, so the bass drum sounds terrible, so you'll have to excuse that. But I'm going to play some really, really basic ideas, and I really only have one thought with my middle school students, and that is to transition them from hitting downbeats to hitting upbeats. So again, rock and roll, if you think about the way rock and roll fills and that sort of thing happen, there's always a 16th note fill that leads into a downbeat that's usually followed by a heavy crash. So boom, chop, ba-boom, boom, chop, boom, chop, suck-a-duka-duka-duka-goosh. And it's very marked. And what it does is it ends forward momentum. It's very declamatory, and there's a conclusion when you play on beat one. Whereas jazz always propels to the next measure. In rock and roll, we're sort of delineating bar lines. We're kind of marking them as we go. Whereas in jazz music, we're sort of trying to erase the bar lines. So we play a lot of upbeat patterns where on the snare drum, we're playing like little ands and little pushes. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 2, 3, and 2, 4, So there's always that push on the and. So even a fill, if kids are used to those fills at the ends of phrases, usually they work. You just want them to end on 4 and then for them to push on the and. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and. So if you can get kids starting to play the ands and identifying those moments when they fall onto the downbeats, that it's stylistically not correct. So I'll play a couple super easy patterns again. I'm not a great drum set player, but I'll just, the gentle idea of those gentle pushes that are on the and. Give that a try. Okay, hopefully you get the idea with some of those examples. I'm certainly not a world-class drum set player, so you'll forgive me for not being the greatest model, but hopefully you get the idea of how those ands help propel the music forward and how ands are really the language of jazz music. The last thing that I'd like to talk about, just for a beginning drum set player, is how to formulate maybe like a 4-bar solo. The kids are going to be intimidated. And there's sort of a paralysis by analysis that leaps into the brain of young drum set players when they're asked to play like a 4-measure solo or something like that. They don't really know the language of jazz, and so they have a hard time with triplet-based feels. And so their drum set fills don't have a 16th feel to it, more of a rock and roll feel than a triplet feel. So some really, really basic ideas is to take a jazz form. The most basic jazz form is AABA, right? So there's a musical idea in the first phrase, there's a similar phrase, something contrasting, and then you go back to that similar phrase. So in terms of song forms, an AABA idea works well with what we're doing. So the fact of the matter is the kids only really have to come up with one good idea, repeat it, do something different, and then repeat it one last time. And one of the easiest ways is to take a rhythm that maybe already exists in the chart. So if there's, let's say that the rhythm is bop bop ga dee ga dot, do bop ba doo ba doo doo, boo bop ba dee ba doo da ba doo da. Like, so if that figure do dot ba dee ba dot, 1 and 3 and 4, if something like that exists in the chart already, then it's a lot easier to give a drum set student who doesn't really know how to craft a solo, just give them that germinal idea and have them play it. Maybe even as simply as on the snare drum, then play it on a tom, then play, let's go the easiest thing imaginable. Either a buzz roll and then repeat that idea one last time. So that's your 4-measure phrase. So measure 1 on the snare, measure 2 on the tom, something different, a buzz roll or just triplets, and then play the figure one last time on a floor tom. And that'll give them at least a jumping off point for creating like a 4-bar solo or something like that. So if kids are trading 4s, or if there's a little solo in the middle of a jazz band chart, they don't have to have any real quote-unquote chops or dexterity. It's really simple, and it's easy to do. So I'll play 4 bars of time and then play the easiest quote-unquote solo I can imagine, and then play out of it, and we'll see if something like that would work for like a middle school student who's never done this before. So here's a very first 4-bar solo for a middle school kid. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, and 1. The most important part of this entire thing is to listen. Listen to really, really spectacular drummers. Make sure that you're listening to jazz music, listening assignments, kids with headphones on and who are digesting that music are going to be the ones that are the most successful. And it's passive. It's something that they can do walking to class or riding in the car with mom and dad. That's something that, YouTube, if they get a good playlist and that you create for them, and they can just sit and digest those wonderful jazz sounds and the wonderful feel of those great jazz drum set players, that they'll be off to the races. So hopefully that's helpful, and you guys can take that home and give it to your drummers, and they can give that a go. Thank you so much.